Back now to the courting of women voters by the Bush and Gore presidential campaigns. CNN's Greta Van Susteran joins us from Washington to take the pulse of the nation. Greta, this is where the action is this time, isn't it?
It sure is, Stephen. The question is, why is Vice President Gore connecting with women voters, and can Governor Bush change enough minds to close that gap? In a few minutes, I'll be taking the pulse of the nation about Election 2000 and women voters. You can take part by calling toll-free 1-877-551-5436 or sending email to greta.newsstand@cnn.com. Joining me now tonight from our Washington Bureau is Democratic Senator Blanche Lincoln of the state of Arkansas. And Phyllis Schlafly joins us from St. Louis. She's president of the Eagle Forum, a conservative organization. First to you, Senator Lincoln, do you have the sense that these two candidates are targeting women in this campaign?
Well, if they're not, they're missing the picture. They definitely should be, and yes, I think they are. Women are going to be the swing voters, and right now you're seeing the defecting moms that have been switching back and forth between these two candidates. So without a doubt, I believe they are targeting the women and should be.
Phyllis, do you agree with her that's targeting the women, and do you get the sense that it's good politics or maybe a little bit of pandering by appearing on some shows and perhaps more like the women's shows?
Oh, well, I think it's fine for them to go on these television shows. You get a good chance to look at the candidates. But I think George Bush ought to take a lesson from Ronald Reagan. This afternoon, I reread his acceptance speeches at the conventions of 1980 and 84. And he wasn't doing any of this pandering, and he did get the women's vote. He wasn't offering babysitters for their toddlers or paid time off to go to the PTA meeting or any of these other things that Al Gore is offering. He was offering opportunity to grow and be your own person in America. America, the land of opportunity. He offered the vision, the hope, and individual responsibility. And I think the majority of women will look for a man who's going to speak up and be a leader and not do this type of pandering, offering all types of handouts with touchy-feely stuff.
But you know, Phyllis, you raised the issue of these grandiose concepts of what President Reagan offered and to the American voters when he was running for president. But in the last few months, according to recent polls, is that Governor Bush has seen a migration of women away from him and towards Vice President Gore. Doesn't he have to get specific and tell the women voters, this is what I'm going to do for you?
He does have to be specific, and he does have to talk about issues. That's true. But look how far we've come since John Kennedy said, ask not what the government can do for you, ask for what you can do for the government. And I think this pandering is really beneath the dignity of women. We don't want government to be our big brother or our father. We want government to get out of our lives and give us the opportunity to spend our own money for the purposes of our choice. And of course, the Democratic platform and the Gore plan is to only give us a tax break if we will spend the money the way they want us to spend it. And they try to disguise it by calling it investments. I'll bet the word investment appears hundreds of times in the Democratic platform. But that's just taking money out of the pockets of some in order to hand it out and hope to buy the votes of others.
Senator Lincoln, is there a gender schism in this country? Is there a big difference between what the women are interested in and what the men are interested in?
I do think there is some differences. I mean, obviously, we're very different. We were created differently. But I don't think it's pandering to offer women and families real solutions to real problems and challenges that they face in their everyday lives. Child care, educating our children, good health care for our children. That's not pandering at all. And it's not asking government to be big brother or your father. It's asking government to partner with you in building this nation based on strong families. I think women do look to government to be a good partner in building strong communities, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
You know, Senator Lincoln, I was reading today a lot about the so-called gender schism, the difference between women voters and male voters, and one of the things that was pointed out was that, at least according to some writers, that it was typically a man's issue is national defense and economy, right, and that the economy seems to be doing relatively well, and that perhaps in this election year is that both candidates realize is that the other issues tend to be more women's issues and recognize the influence in 96 of the women voters. Doesn't that suggest that that's where all the attention should be, at least if you want to win?
Well, I think certainly that plays a role in it. And men do tend to be more of a one-issue voter oftentimes. It may be the issues of national defense or the military or other things. Women traditionally have had to look at many different issues in their day. They've had to balance a sick child on one hip while they're helping one with their homework, all the while that they're running the church bazaar or other things like that. So women have had to look at a broad array of different issues: health care, child care, education. All of these different things are really important.
Well, one thing I
Greta,
don't understand. Go ahead, Phyllis.
I certainly don't want to partner with the government in spending my money, in raising my children, in deciding the education of my children. That's not my idea of America. We want the president to be a leader, to be a strong leader, but not this partnership.
We do have choices
We don't
in
want
educating our
government to
children.
partner with us.
But let me ask you this, Phyllis. What is the president, what is someone going to run on if the sort of typical men issues, if you believe what people say, is national defense and economy? We seem to be doing reasonably well on those issues. I mean, what's a candidate going to do if he wants to win?
Well, just take a lesson from Ronald Reagan. Remember, he did get the women's vote, and he didn't do any of this pandering. He didn't talk about babysitters or fewer kids in classrooms or anything like that. That just wasn't the way he did it, because that isn't the role of the federal government. And I object completely to this idea of partnering with the government. We want to spend our own money.
And of course, then, let me just stop you for 1 second. We'll all get in the discussion, even I will too. We're going to take a break. But when we come back, we'll be taking the pulse of the nation about election 2000 and women voters. You can take... Welcome back. We're taking the pulse of the nation about election 2000 and women voters. Phyllis, before we went to break, you mentioned President Ronald Reagan. You talked about how he approached it different from how the candidates are now. Isn't the situation a little bit different because during the Reagan administrations, the Cold War was a very serious threat, at least to the American people, and didn't he have different issues to target?
Well, he did have the issue of the Cold War, a fight against communism. That is perfectly true. But there are all sorts of issues today. There are tremendous issues. The issue of China, which may be as great a threat in the coming years as Russia was in those years. Who knows? So there are plenty of issues to talk about. And while I do think education is a major issue with most people, I think the candidates should level with the American people and say that the federal government is not going to solve it and cannot solve it because only 6% of the money in schools is federal money.
All right, well, let's see what our viewers have to say. We have a comment, an email comment from a viewer which reads as follows. We need a president who is very well informed, has intellect, is experienced, serious, and who wants to make our system work for us. That's Joe. Of course, I assume, Senator Lincoln, that that's something that you would not disagree with. But why do you think...
Absolutely not.
Why do you think it is? I mean, is it fair to men when we say that education is a women's issue? Isn't that also a man's issue?
Oh, of course it is. It's anyone's issue who cares about the blessing of our children and the future of this nation. You know, as Phyllis was mentioning, you know, I think some of the difference between those Reagan years is we've moved more from a me generation back then to more of a we generation. You have choices in this nation of where you send your children, and I think that's appropriate. We also have to understand that there are a multitude of children out there who absolutely depend on public education. And that's important for everyone's children. For the future colleagues of my children in years to come, I want them to be well educated as well. So education is definitely, there's not a gender issue there. We're talking about our future workforce,
and speaking of
military,
gender,
and other.
And speaking of gender issue, let me read a comment from another viewer, an email comment which reads, I am concerned about the readiness of the military, the economy, truthfulness from politicians. I'm sick of spin. As please quit thinking of us women as monolithic. That's Julia. Phyllis, you know, that sort of was a little bit of my complaint, is that we generalize that all women say this, all women think this, or all men do.
Well, that's right. I agree completely with that. And as a matter of fact, Bill Snyder said that in the opening to this program. Women are not a monolith. And George Bush has the married women. It's the single women who are up for grabs at the present time. So you really should not look at women as some kind of monolith. The real difference is between the married women and the single women.
And Senator Lincoln, it seems to me these issues that we call, quote, women's issues, it seems to me, and that there's a criticism of maybe the candidates focusing on them to target the women, it seems to me that times have just changed and that these issues are important issues. It's just that the two candidates may have different remedies as how to resolve them. Is that a fair way to say it?
Well, I think they definitely have different remedies. I think they also have gone about in different ways in being specific about those remedies. I mean, Vice President Gore has given us some great remedies in terms of the specifics of his plan and what he's going to do, a prescription drug package, you know, which is important to young women like myself who have parents that are on Medicare. You know, these are not just issues that go age or gender. They're affecting all of us in today's society, and I think we're becoming more and more aware of that. So I think the specifics in their actual remedies is a real key to this, and that's what women pay attention to. As your show mentioned earlier, men pay attention somewhat to personalities and sometimes one issue. Women look at the overall picture and certainly those family and what people quote as women's issues.
But it's extraordinary how in the 1996 election that women had such an impact on the outcome, according to people who have studied it very closely. But we're taking another break.
I think that shows that women do look at personality, and I don't understand the women who voted for Clinton, but you, as you say, they did. But I think we all ought to note that all of these wonderful remedies that Al Gore proposes are all very costly, and they're all money coming out of our pockets, which he is trying to disguise under the term investment.
But that goes to the issue of remedy, but rather than to the issue of the issues. But we're going to take another break.
Using a surplus wisely, investing it back.
Let me just do the horrible thing and interrupt you. We'll be right back. You can still call in and email. We'll be right back. Tonight we're taking the pulse of the nation about Election 2000 and women voters. My guests are Democratic Senator Blanche Lincoln of Arkansas and Phyllis Schlafly, who is the president of the Eagle Forum. And we have a caller on the line from the state of California. Go ahead, caller.
Women do care greatly about what's going on in this election. They are very concerned about the Supreme Court. This is going to be critical, very critical with the next president, and abortion rights. Very important for women. And education. Education affects everyone. It affects our seniors. It affects everyone in this country, because if we don't train our children properly and educate them, we will not have the leadership we need in the future. So don't rule out women in this election. They're going to make a huge difference.
Well, Senator Lincoln, go ahead. Senator Lincoln, let me ask you about the Supreme Court and the women vote. Do you think that women are paying particular attention to that or not? I don't know how much anyone's paying attention to that.
No, I certainly do think that they're paying attention to it. I hear it all the time when I'm out there, certainly in the state of Arkansas and across this nation, that women recognize that the next president will appoint either 2 to 4 of the next Supreme Court justices, and they understand very much that this is not a decision for government to make, that this is a decision that women should be making on their own, in consultation with their physicians, with their family, and their creator, and that it is not a government issue. And so I think they recognize a great deal of what it's going to mean to them if a government appointed, a presidentially appointed Supreme Court, what it's going to say in the issue of a woman's right to choose.
Phyllis, what about that right to choose?
I would like to point out that there are more women who are pro-life than men. Always has been. Every poll that's ever been taken. And of the approximately 10% of people who let that decide their vote, they vote pro-life at least 3 to 2, maybe 2 to 1. So well, the more you talk about that issue, the more it is going to help George W. Bush.
Most of those are one-issue voters, and you're right on that. That oftentimes they do tend to be one-issue voters, but I can't believe the numbers that there are more women that vote in that arena. And I think that women really do truly look to the fact that they don't want government involved in that decision, whether they're pro-life or whether they're pro-choice. They don't want government involved.
Phyllis,
what
about Dick Cheney? Is that help or hurt with women's vote for Governor Bush?
Oh,
or is it irrelevant?
Yes, I don't know. I think it's probably a plus, and I think his wife is a plus too.
All right, let me give you the same question, Senator Lincoln. Only reverse it and put it for Vice President Gore. Is Senator Lieberman a plus, a minus, or have no impact on the women's vote in this election?
Senator Lieberman he's a great choice. I've served with Joe Lieberman for the 19 months I've been in the Senate. He's a fabulous individual. He's a principled man. He's a hard worker. He believes in getting results, and that's what women want. Women ultimately want results. They want their government to be productive for them. They want it to be efficient for them. And that's what Joe Lieberman's all about. He was an excellent selection.
Let me
stop
you both there. I'm sorry, Phyllis, I'm sorry you're the one I have to interrupt tonight because that's all the time we have tonight. Thanks for your calls and emails, and a special thanks, of course, to our guests. Tomorrow on Burden of